Shattered Secrets. Chapter 1. The First Suspicions. Jason woke up the next day with a heavy feeling in his chest. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Emily had already left for work without even leaving a note. She always left notes, small messages, wishing him a good day or reminding him of something, but recently, everything had changed. These little details that once seemed insignificant now took on a sinister tone. He poured himself a cup of coffee and stared out the window, his gaze falling on Emily's phone. Left on the kitchen table, his heart skipped a beat. She never forgot her phone. Jason stood there for a long time, looking at the device, his inner voice battling with temptation. He didn't want to be the husband who snooped through his wife's things, but the suspicions gnawing at his mind wouldn't let him be. Before he could talk himself out of it, his hand reached for the phone on its own. Jason unlocked it, and his eyes immediately fell on a chain of messages. Most of them were ordinary, from colleagues, friends, family. But one name stood out among the rest: Benjamin. They had never talked about a Benjamin, but their correspondence, though brief, seemed far too personal. He opened the chat, and his eyes skimmed over the latest messages. Benjamin, last night went well. I hope you got home without any problems. Emily, yes, everything's fine. Thanks for the evening. Benjamin, I can't wait for our next meeting. You're amazing. Jason felt something tighten inside him. Those words could mean nothing, but in the context of the past few weeks, they hit him like a sledgehammer. Next meeting? What evening had they spent together? And why had she hidden it from him? He tried to recall what Emily had been doing the night before. She had said she was meeting with friends from college. It hadn't even crossed his mind to question her words. But now, knowing there had been some meeting with Benjamin, everything looked different. Suddenly, the door opened, and Emily walked into the kitchen. She saw Jason holding her phone, and for a moment, her face went pale. It was a barely noticeable but very telling moment that Jason couldn't miss. She quickly regained her composure, smiled, and said, "Oh, you found my phone. I've been looking for it everywhere. Thanks for noticing." Jason slowly handed her the phone, feeling the fog of suspicion growing thicker in his mind. "No problem," he replied, trying not to reveal his emotions. "Did you forget something?" "Yes, I needed to send an important message." Emily quickly took the phone and headed into another room. Jason remained in the kitchen, feeling as if distrust had settled deep in his heart. He realized that if he didn't deal with this now, the doubts would only grow. But how should he proceed? Should he follow his suspicions, or try to salvage what was left of their trust? Chapter 2. Growing Anxiety. Jason couldn't shake the nagging feeling that had been haunting him since the moment he saw the messages from Benjamin. Just a week ago, he would have dismissed them. But now, every word Emily said seemed deceitful, every smile fake. He tried to convince himself it was all in his head, but the doubts refused to go away. The next day, during his lunch break, Jason decided to meet with Jane, Emily's sister. They arranged to have lunch at a small cafe, where they often met as a family. Jason knew that Jane had always been close to Emily, and he hoped he could learn something from her without revealing his suspicions. As soon as they sat down at the table, Jane noticed his tension. "You don't look well," she said, pouring herself some tea. "Is something wrong?" Jason hesitated for a moment, unsure if he should say anything, but then decided it was time to speak up. "I don't know," he began, trying to keep his voice steady. "Lately, Emily has been acting strangely. She's been working late more often, and she's got new friends I don't know anything about. For example, who is Benjamin?" Jane tensed slightly, her expression changing almost imperceptibly. She took a careful sip of her tea, clearly weighing her response. Benjamin. I've heard her mention him a couple of times, but Emily hasn't really talked about him much. I know they met through work. Why do you ask? Yesterday, I accidentally saw their messages. Nothing too explicit, but it feels like she's hiding something from me, Jason admitted, feeling the anxiety tightening in his chest. Maybe I'm just overthinking it, but I can't shake the feeling that she's spending too much time with him. Jane hesitated, as if considering whether to continue the conversation. Then she leaned in closer, lowering her voice. You know, Jason, I've been meaning to talk to you. You're right, Emily has changed. Over the past few weeks, I've seen her with this Benjamin several times. They're not just colleagues. I'm pretty sure there's something more going on. I tried talking to her about it, but she refused to discuss it with me. Those words hit Jason like a cold wave. He felt the ground slipping from under his feet. Are you serious? He asked, barely managing to keep the tremor out of his voice. Do you think she's cheating on me? I can't say for sure, Jane replied, looking troubled. But what I've seen doesn't sit right with me. I don't want to jump to conclusions, but Jason, you need to find out the truth. Jason fell silent, trying to process what he had just heard. His world began to crumble. Everything he knew about his wife was suddenly thrown into doubt. He had to do something, but how could he act without destroying everything completely? That evening, he returned home, overwhelmed by the realization that he had to uncover the truth, no matter how painful it might be. From that moment on, his suspicions became a mission. He knew he could no longer live in uncertainty, and he resolved to watch Emily's every move, every word, every call. Chapter 3. The deadly discovery. The night brought with it a thick darkness, but Jason couldn't sleep. He lay in bed next to Emily, listening to her steady breathing. Outside, the rain drummed against the windows, amplifying the sense of isolation and dread. He tried to convince himself that everything was just a figment of his imagination, but now that seemed impossible. The next day, Jason decided to take action. He went to work as usual, but soon returned home under the pretense of having forgotten some important documents. In reality, his plan was far more calculated. Jason installed a hidden camera in the house, pointed at the living room and kitchen, the places where Emily usually spent time when he wasn't around. It felt like a low and shameful act, but he was willing to do anything to uncover the truth. A few days passed. Emily didn't notice anything unusual, and Jason began to think it had all been a mistake. But one evening, when she left again under the pretense of meeting with friends, Jason decided to review the footage from the camera. His heart pounded as the video of the living room appeared on the screen. He fast-forwarded to the moment when Emily returned home. She walked down the hallway, phone in hand, clearly engrossed in a conversation. Jason turned up the volume, straining to catch every word. Suddenly, she stopped, and Jason heard her voice, quiet but filled with warmth. Yes, I miss you too. I've been thinking about you all day. Yes, of course, let's meet tomorrow as usual. You know how much I enjoy it. Jason felt his hands tremble. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Emily continued talking, her voice full of the affection and tenderness that had long since vanished from their marriage. The conversation was short, but it was enough to shatter what little trust remained. When Emily returned home late that evening, Jason was already waiting for her in the living room. He sat in a chair, trying to maintain his composure. But inside, a storm was brewing. When she entered, their eyes met, and Emily froze, sensing something was wrong. "You're back," Jason said calmly, not taking his eyes off her face. "Yes," she replied, sensing the tension in the air. "Is everything okay?" "Perfectly fine. How was your meeting with your friends?" Emily hesitated for a moment, but quickly regained her composure. "Good. We just hung out at a cafe, caught up." Jason nodded, rising from his chair. He slowly walked toward her, his eyes never leaving her face. He was searching for any sign of deceit, and it didn't take long to find it. "And how's Benjamin? Did you have a good chat with him too?" Emily's face went pale, her eyes widening in shock. For a second she was frozen, unsure of what to say. This was the key moment. She could either confess or try to wriggle out of it, but Jason already knew the answer. What are you talking about?" She tried to smile, but her voice trembled. "Don't pretend, Emily. I heard your conversation. I know you've been seeing him, not your friends." Emily took a step back, trying to say something, but the words caught in her throat. She knew there was no excuse. Jason stood before her, his eyes filled with fury and betrayal. Everything he thought he knew about his wife suddenly collapsed. "Why?" he asked quietly, struggling to keep his emotions in check. "Why did you do it?" Emily remained silent. She knew there was no answer that could fix what had been broken. Jason realized that their life together could never be the same again. He stood on the brink of something terrible, and this was only the beginning. But he also knew that he wouldn't stop until he uncovered the whole truth, no matter how dark it turned out to be. Chapter 4. Preparing for Divorce. The morning dawned gray and cold, reflecting Jason's state of mind. He hadn't slept all night, consumed by thoughts of what to do next. Emily's betrayal had struck him with such force that it was hard to breathe. But now, anger was beginning to take over the pain. He had made a decision. He needed to protect himself, his future, and whatever remained of his dignity. Divorce was inevitable. Jason called his old friend Mike a divorce attorney. He didn't want to share his problems with just anyone, but Mike was someone he trusted implicitly. They arranged to meet that same day, and Jason headed to Mike's office, trying to suppress the emotions boiling inside him. When they met, Mike immediately sensed that something was wrong. Jason rarely looked so defeated. "You look like your world just collapsed," Mike observed, motioning to the chair in front of his desk. "Tell me what happened." Jason sat down, exhaling deeply. He looked at his friend, and the words came pouring out. "Emily's cheating on me, Mike. I'm sure of it. I've seen the evidence. She's been seeing some guy named Benjamin. I can't take it anymore. I want a divorce." Mike nodded, listening carefully. He didn't ask unnecessary questions, understanding that what mattered most now was helping his friend. "I understand," he replied calmly. "I'll help you get through this. The first thing we need to do is protect your assets. I'll help you transfer money to separate accounts and ensure that Emily can't touch them. After that, we'll file for divorce. Do you have proof of the affair?" Jason pulled out his phone and showed Mike the recordings from the hidden camera, where Emily's conversation with Benjamin could be clearly heard. Mike listened carefully, his expression growing more serious with each passing moment. "That's solid evidence," Mike said, handing the phone back to Jason. "It'll work in your favor in court, but I'd advise you to gather more information before taking any drastic steps. If you want to come out of this with minimal damage, we need to be careful." Jason knew Mike was right. He wanted to sever ties with Emily immediately, but his rational mind told him to prepare. He nodded in agreement with the plan. "All right, we'll do it your way. But Mike, I'm not just going to let this go. I want her to feel what it's like to be betrayed." Mike looked at his friend intently, noticing something in his eyes that he hadn't seen before. "I understand your anger, but be careful. Revenge can destroy you too," Mike warned. "Focus on getting out of this with your dignity intact." Jason silently nodded, but inside, the rage was still boiling. He couldn't forget how Emily had deceived him, how she had laughed and talked with Benjamin as if he were her real husband. He wasn't going to let them get away with it so easily. Returning home, Jason began to act. He transferred the money to separate accounts, cut off Emily's access to their joint finances, and started gathering documents for the divorce. He managed to keep his composure when Emily returned home that evening. She had no idea that her world was about to come crashing down. The next day, Jason met with Jane. She looked worried when she saw him. "Did you find out everything?" she asked, sitting down beside him at the cafe. "Yes," he replied coldly. "She's definitely cheating on me. Now, I'm preparing for the divorce. And Jane, I need you to keep watching her. If you learn anything new, let me know." Jane nodded, though her face expressed regret. She didn't want to be part of this drama, but she understood that Jason needed her support. Jason knew this was only the beginning. Ahead lay days and nights filled with doubt and pain. But he was determined. He wasn't just going to survive this. He was going to make sure Emily and her lover paid for their betrayal. Deep down, Jason felt that his old life was over, but that didn't mean he was giving up. He was ready to fight for his future, whatever it might hold. Chapter 5. The unthinkable happens. A few days had passed since Jason began preparing for the divorce. He tried to remain rational and composed, but thoughts of Emily's betrayal were constantly swirling in his mind. Every small gesture, every glance from his wife seemed false, as if she were playing a role in some twisted drama while he was merely a spectator. Nevertheless, Jason continued to observe Emily, careful not to reveal his intentions. He had arranged for Jane to stay alert and report any suspicious activity on her sister's part. But the shocking news Jane brought to him next would completely turn his world upside down. They met again at the same cafe where they had discussed their concerns before. Jane looked more troubled than usual, even a bit frightened, which was unlike her normally confident demeanor. Jason immediately sensed that something significant had happened. "I found out something about Benjamin," she began, nervously stirring her tea. "And it's bad news." "What did you find out?" Jason frowned, bracing himself for another blow. "Did you know that he's married?" Jane paused, waiting for his reaction. Jason nodded. He already knew that from Jane before, but there was something more in her voice. Something that made this information feel much more ominous. "Well, his wife died recently in a car accident. A very strange accident. She lost control and crashed into a tree. Everyone says it was just an unfortunate accident, but I'm not so sure. The thing is, Emily knew his wife. They even met a few times, and now, when I look back at everything, I get this strange feeling." "You think Emily is involved somehow?" Jason froze, not believing what he was hearing. The thought seemed utterly unreal, but something inside him whispered that this was no mere coincidence. "I don't know, but everything points to something being off. Emily seems to know a lot more about what happened, but she's staying quiet about it. Maybe she wasn't directly involved, but I think she's hiding something." Jane looked at him with concern. "Jason, I don't want to speculate, but you need to be careful. This might be more than just an affair. What if there's money involved, or something else?" Jane's words hit Jason like a cold shower. Suddenly, everything became much more complicated than he had imagined. The affair alone had been painful enough, but if Emily was truly involved in Benjamin's wife's death, this crossed every boundary. He couldn't believe his wife was capable of something so heinous. But the secret meetings with this man and her secrecy painted a picture that made him question his own reality. "I need to get to the bottom of this," Jason said, his voice firm. "If this is true, I need to know all the details. I can't just leave it at that." Jane nodded, understanding that they were now playing a dangerous game. With every step, Jason was becoming more convinced that his life was falling apart. He no longer just wanted a divorce. He needed to find out who his wife really was and how far she was willing to go. That evening, Jason decided to confront Emily directly. He couldn't wait any longer. not when everything was spiraling out of control. This time, he was prepared to hear the truth, no matter how dark it was. Emily returned home later than usual. She seemed calm, as if nothing had happened. But Jason couldn't wait any longer. As soon as she entered the house, he asked her to come into the kitchen and told her they needed to talk. "What do you want to talk about?" she asked, trying to appear indifferent. But Jason noticed a flicker of anxiety in her eyes. "About your friend, Benjamin," he replied bluntly, "and about his wife." Emily's face went pale, and this time she couldn't hide her fear. Jason felt her reaction confirm his worst suspicions. "What do you want to know?" Her voice was hoarse, as if she knew there was no escaping the truth now. "You knew her. You knew she died, and you're still meeting with her husband. What's going on, Emily? What are you hiding?" Emily was silent, her face twisted with fear and panic. Jason realized that the woman standing before him was someone he no longer recognized. The secrets she had been keeping were far darker and more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. Now, Jason stood on the brink, not just of divorce, but of something far more perilous. He had to uncover the truth before it destroyed his life completely. Chapter 6. A New Threat. Jane's words wouldn't leave Jason's mind. He was becoming more convinced that there was something far darker behind Emily's behavior than just an affair. Now that the possibility of her involvement in the death of Benjamin's wife had surfaced, Jason realized that his life was teetering on the edge, not just of collapse, but of real danger. Jason decided to conduct his own investigation. He started by gathering as much information as he could about Benjamin and his deceased wife. Online, he found several news articles about the strange accident that claimed her life. The details were suspicious. There were no skid marks on the road, and no one could explain why the car had suddenly veered off course. The case had been closed as an accident, but Jason felt this was just the tip of the iceberg. The following day, when Jason returned from work, he found an unmarked envelope in his mailbox. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a short, printed message: "Leave it alone before it's too late." The words sent a chill down his spine. Someone knew he was digging into this. Someone wanted him to stop asking questions. Barely keeping his anxiety in check, Jason went inside and tried to collect his thoughts. His mind raced with questions. Who could have sent this warning? Was it Benjamin himself? Or had Emily found out about his investigation? Or was there someone else involved? That evening, when Emily came home, Jason tried to act normal, but the tension between them was palpable. Emily was unusually quiet, as if something was bothering her, but she didn't want to talk about it. They ate dinner in silence, each of them feeling the weight of the unspoken secrets between them. That night, after Emily fell asleep, Jason decided to check her phone again. He knew it was wrong, but he felt he had no other choice. He needed to know what was going on. But when he tried to unlock her phone, he found that she had set a new password. This only deepened his suspicions. Refusing to give up, Jason reached out to an old friend who worked in cybersecurity and asked him to help hack into the phone. The friend didn't ask too many questions, understanding that the situation was serious. When Jason finally gained access to the phone, what he found shocked him. There were numerous messages from Benjamin, carefully hidden in a secure, encrypted chat. The content was disturbing. The messages weren't just about meetings. They talked about money, insurance, and strange instructions that Benjamin was giving Emily. It all looked like part of a larger conspiracy. One message stood out among the rest. Make sure he doesn't find out until it's all over. Jason's worst fears were confirmed. This wasn't just an affair. Emily and Benjamin were clearly plotting something serious, and he was caught in the middle of it. His life might be in danger, and time was running out. That night, Jason didn't sleep. He realized he was in danger, and that the only way to survive was to outmaneuver his enemies. He decided he couldn't wait any longer. The next day, he would confront Benjamin face to face. This meeting could be the turning point. Jason didn't know how it would end, but he was prepared to go to the very end. There was no longer any room for doubt or hesitation. Jason was filled with nothing but determination and rage. His world had fallen apart, but he wasn't going to be a victim. He was ready to fight for his life, no matter what it took. Chapter 7. Uncovering the Truth. The days after Jason's confrontation with Benjamin dragged on like a nightmare. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Every sound in the house, every unfamiliar car on the street, felt like a harbinger of impending doom. He knew the game was nearing its climax and that he was running out of time. Jason decided he couldn't wait any longer. He had to act before Benjamin made his next move. He called Jane and shared his plan. The time had come to take matters into his own hands. "We need to make him slip up," Jason said during the call with Jane. "He thinks he's in control, but if we play this right, we can catch him off guard." "What are you planning?" Jane asked, her voice filled with concern. "I'm going to meet him again, but this time I won't be alone. I need your help. We need to record his confession. If he feels cornered, he might say something that we can use as evidence against him." Jane hesitated, but knew they had no other choice. If they didn't do something, their lives would remain in danger. "All right," she agreed. "I'll set it up. We'll do it tomorrow evening." The next day, Jason and Jane prepared for the meeting. Jason hid a small recorder in his jacket, while Jane arranged for someone to monitor the situation from a distance, ready to hand over the recording to the police if necessary. They arranged to meet Benjamin in an abandoned parking lot on the outskirts of town, where the risk of being noticed was minimal. When Jason arrived at the meeting place, he saw Benjamin waiting by his car. The air was thick with tension. Benjamin appeared calm, but there was a cold, determined look in his eyes. Jason realized that this man would stop at nothing to achieve his goals. "So you wanted to talk again?" Benjamin asked with a mocking smile as Jason approached. "Or do you have something specific in mind this time?" "I want you to leave me and my family alone," Jason said firmly. "You've done enough. If you don't stop, I'll go to the police and tell them everything I know." Benjamin's smile faded, and a dangerous glint appeared in his eyes. "You still don't get it, do you, Jason?" His voice was icy. "You're not going to accomplish anything with your threats. You're the one who should be afraid. If you don't disappear, I'll make sure you do." Jason took a step closer, not breaking eye contact with Benjamin. "You killed your wife to collect on the insurance, and now you're trying to do the same to me. But this time, you chose the wrong target. I'm not going down without a fight." Suddenly, Benjamin pulled a gun from his pocket, his face twisted with anger. "I warned you, Jason. You've crossed a line. Now nothing will stop me from finishing what I started." Jason felt a surge of adrenaline. He hadn't expected Benjamin to go this far, but he was ready. At that moment, Jerry, an old friend of Jason's who had agreed to help, quietly approached from behind and grabbed Benjamin's arm, the one holding the gun. A fierce struggle ensued. Benjamin tried to break free and fire, but Jason and Jerry wrestled with him, trying to disarm him. The whole ordeal lasted only seconds, but in those seconds, their fates were decided. Eventually, Jerry managed to knock the gun out of Benjamin's hand, sending it clattering to the asphalt. Jason pinned Benjamin to the ground while Jerry held him down. Benjamin struggled, but Jerry's grip was too strong. "It's over," Jason panted, feeling the rage and fear finally give way to relief. "You're going to pay for everything." At that moment, Jane emerged from her hiding spot, holding up the recorder that had captured all of Benjamin's threats. They knew they had enough evidence now to take him down for good. When the police arrived, Jason handed over the recorder, knowing that Benjamin wouldn't be able to escape justice this time. Emily, upon learning what had happened, tried to flee, but she was arrested the next day on charges of conspiracy. The confrontation was over, but Jason knew the consequences of that night would stay with him forever. He now had to start a new life, leaving behind a past that had proven both destructive and dangerous. But most importantly, he knew he had avoided the trap and emerged victorious from a deadly game. Chapter 8: The Final Showdown. A week had passed since Jason and Jerry subdued Benjamin, and the police took him into custody. Jason still couldn't quite believe that the nightmare he had been living through was finally over. But the sense of victory was tempered by the realization that new challenges awaited him. Emily had been arrested the day after the confrontation. She had attempted to flee, but the authorities quickly tracked her down based on the evidence Jason and Jane had provided. She was charged with conspiracy to commit murder and fraud. The possibility of a long prison sentence loomed over her. While Jason felt a measure of relief, the bitterness of the situation still lingered. His wife, the woman he had once loved and trusted, had been involved in such a terrible crime. The divorce proceedings began immediately after Emily's arrest. With Mike's guidance, the process was swift and relatively painless for Jason. Thanks to the evidence they had gathered, he was able to secure his assets and maintain control of their home. Within days, the divorce was finalized, severing the last ties to a marriage that had been destroyed by lies and betrayal. Jane, who had played a crucial role in uncovering the truth about Emily and Benjamin, was also trying to rebuild her life after the ordeal. Her bond with Jason had grown stronger, despite the trauma they had endured together. They often talked about everything that had happened, helping each other cope with the emotional aftermath. One evening, a few weeks after the trial, Jason and Jane sat on the porch of his new house, watching the sunset. The air was filled with the scent of fresh grass, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves on the trees. The silence between them was comfortable, but it was clear that both were lost in their thoughts. "Did you ever think it would come to this?" Jane asked, breaking the silence. Jason shook his head, a tired smile on his face. "Never. If someone had told me a year ago that I'd be caught up in something like this, I would have laughed and called it crazy. But now," he sighed, glancing around, "now I realize how little we really know about the people we love." "I'm glad it's over, but I still feel guilty," Jane admitted. "I should have noticed something earlier, should have done something to prevent this, but I didn't." Jason reached out and placed a hand on Jane's. "You saved me, Jane. You helped me see the truth. If it weren't for you, I don't know where I'd be now. We did everything we could, and now we have to move forward." They sat in silence for a few more minutes, savoring the peace. Despite everything, Jason felt a sense of calm beginning to settle over him. He had lost much, but he had also found strength within himself and discovered who his true friends were. Yet, even as Jason began to find some measure of peace, a shadow remained in the back of his mind. Every time he saw a news story about Benjamin or Emily, that shadow would grow, reminding him that evil could hide in the most unexpected places. He knew that his journey toward complete recovery would be a long one. But strangely enough, Jason felt a sense of gratitude. He was grateful for having survived the ordeal because it had revealed a strength he never knew he had. He understood that sometimes you had to walk through darkness to see the light. Now, Jason was ready to begin a new chapter in his life. A life where he would be more careful about who he trusted, where he would cherish every moment with those who truly mattered. And though many challenges lay ahead, he knew he was prepared to face them head on. Chapter 9: The Aftermath. Months had passed since Jason's life had been upended by betrayal, conspiracy, and danger. The chaos had finally settled, leaving him to rebuild from the ruins. Emily and Benjamin were both behind bars, facing long sentences for their crimes. Jason had sold the house where everything had unraveled and moved to a new neighborhood, eager to leave behind the shadows of his past. Life had slowly begun to return to normal. Jason was focused on his work, his friendships, and finding peace in the routine of daily life. Yet, The scars remained. Even as he started to heal, a lingering unease gnawed at him, a sense that something was still unresolved. He couldn't explain it, but he felt as though the story wasn't truly over. One morning, as Jason was getting ready for work, his phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from an unknown sender. Curious, but cautious, he opened it. The message was short, but chilling. "You thought it was over. The real game has just begun." Jason's blood ran cold. Who could have sent this? Benjamin and Emily were in prison. There shouldn't be anyone else, but the ominous tone of the message suggested otherwise. Suddenly, the feeling that had been haunting him for months made sense. There was more to the story than he had realized. He immediately called Jane, who had been his steadfast ally through it all. She answered on the second ring, her voice filled with concern when she heard the tension in his. "Jane, I just got a message. It says the real game is just beginning. I thought it was over, but now I'm not so sure." There was a pause on the other end of the line before Jane responded, her voice trembling slightly. "Jason, you need to be careful. We thought we knew everything, but maybe we missed something. Meet me at my place tonight. We need to figure out what's going on." The day dragged on as Jason tried to focus at work, but his mind kept returning to the email. When the evening finally arrived, he headed to Jane's house. As he pulled up to her driveway, he noticed the door was slightly ajar. His heart sank. Something was wrong. He rushed inside, calling out her name. The house was eerily quiet, except for the faint hum of a ceiling fan. Jason found Jane lying on the floor in the living room, her eyes wide open in terror. Next to her was a single, unmarked envelope. His hands trembling, Jason picked up the envelope and opened it. Inside was a photograph, an image of him standing in front of his new house, taken from a distance. On the back of the photo were the words, "We're always watching." Jason's world tilted as fear gripped him. Someone knew his every move. Someone was still out there, toying with him like a cat with a mouse. Panic surged through him as he realized the nightmare wasn't over. It was just beginning. Desperate, Jason grabbed his phone to call the police. But before he could dial, the phone rang. The number was blocked. Hesitating for only a moment, he answered the call, his breath hitching in his throat. "Hello, Jason," a distorted voice said on the other end. It was familiar, yet twisted. "I hope you didn't think it would end so easily. What happened before was just the warm-up. Now, the real fun begins." Jason's heart pounded in his chest as he recognized the voice. "Benjamin, but how? He was supposed to be in prison. You're supposed to be dead," Jason whispered, his voice barely audible. "You can't be here." "Oh, I'm very much alive, and I'm not alone," the voice continued, dripping with malice. "There are more of us, Jason. We're everywhere, and we won't stop until we've taken everything from you. Your life is our game now, and we'll play it until you break." The line went dead, leaving Jason standing in stunned silence. The full weight of the situation crashed down on him. This wasn't just about revenge. It was a coordinated effort, a conspiracy that extended far beyond what he had imagined. His enemies were more powerful and more numerous than he had ever realized. Outside, the wind began to howl, and a storm was brewing. Jason stood in the center of a collapsing world, unsure of what to do next. But one thing was clear. From this moment on, every step he took would be a fight for survival. The nightmare had only just begun. Chapter 10. The final twist. The storm outside raged as Jason stood in the wreckage of what had once been his life. The revelation that Benjamin was still out there, orchestrating a twisted game, shattered any sense of security he had managed to rebuild. The email, the photograph, and Jane's lifeless body, all of it pointed to one terrifying truth. The nightmare was far from over. Jason knew he couldn't stay at Jane's house. Whoever had killed her might still be watching, waiting for him to slip up. With trembling hands, He pocketed the photograph and the envelope, then fled the house, locking the door behind him. He had to think, to come up with a plan. But the weight of fear pressed down on him, clouding his thoughts. He drove aimlessly for hours, trying to outrun the terror gnawing at him. He knew he couldn't go to the police, not yet. The conspiracy was too deep, the players too hidden. He needed answers, but more than that, he needed to survive. Finally, as dawn broke, Jason found himself at a remote motel on the outskirts of town. The neon sign flickered above him, casting an eerie glow over the deserted parking lot. He checked in under a false name, paying cash, and took the key to his room. Inside, the walls were thin, the bed uncomfortable, but it was a place to hide, if only for a moment. As he sat on the edge of the bed, Jason reviewed everything that had happened. He thought about Benjamin, Emily, the threats, and the trail of death that had followed him. How had it all come to this? How had he missed the signs that something even darker was lurking beneath the surface? The answer came to him suddenly, like a bolt of lightning. He had been so focused on Benjamin and Emily that he had overlooked the one person who had been there from the very beginning. Jane. She had been his ally, his confidant, the one who had helped him gather evidence against Emily and Benjamin. But what if she had been playing him all along? Jason's mind raced as he pieced it together. Jane had been the one who first suggested that Emily might be involved with Benjamin. She had fed him information, nudged him toward the decisions that led to their downfall. But what if Jane had been manipulating him from the start? What if she had been part of the conspiracy all along? It was a horrifying thought, but it made sense. Jane had known too much, been too involved. She had always been there, always pushing him toward the next step. And now, with her death, she had removed herself from the equation, leaving Jason alone to face the consequences. Suddenly, the phone in his motel room rang, snapping him out of his thoughts. Jason stared at it, dread pooling in his stomach. He knew who it would be before he even picked up the receiver. "Hello, Jason," the voice on the other end purred. It was Jane's voice, cold and mocking, no longer pretending. "Surprised? You shouldn't be. You were always so easy to manipulate, so eager to trust. I almost feel sorry for you." "Jane." Jason's voice cracked, a mixture of disbelief and rage. "Why? Why would you do this?" "Because it was fun," she replied, with a laugh that sent chills down his spine. "You were a means to an end, Jason. You took down Benjamin and Emily for us, and you didn't even realize it. Now you're all that's left. And I have to say, it's been quite the ride watching you squirm." Jason's blood turned to ice as the full extent of the betrayal sank in. He had been a pawn in a game he hadn't even known he was playing, and now, the people pulling the strings were closing in for the kill. "What do you want from me?" Jason demanded, gripping the phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. "It's not about what we want, Jason. It's about what you'll do next," Jane replied, her tone dripping with malice. "But don't worry, we'll be watching. Every move you make, every step you take, we'll be right there, enjoying the show. After all, we've come this far, haven't we?" The line went dead, leaving Jason alone in the silence of the motel room. He dropped the phone, his mind reeling. Everything he thought he knew had been turned upside down. The people he trusted were his enemies, and the enemies he thought he had defeated were still in control. As the storm raged outside, Jason realized that there was no escape. He had been drawn into a web of deceit, and now there was no way out. The game would continue, and he was trapped in it, a puppet on strings he couldn't see. But even as despair threatened to consume him, a spark of defiance ignited within him. They might be watching, they might have outplayed him at every turn, but Jason wasn't done yet. He had lost everything, but he still had one thing left: the will to fight back. Jason stood up, a new resolve hardening within him. If they wanted a game, he would give them one. He would turn the tables, find a way to expose them, and bring their twisted conspiracy crashing down. It wouldn't be easy, and it might cost him everything, but he would no longer be their pawn. The storm outside began to ease, but the battle ahead was just beginning. Jason knew that the odds were against him, but he was ready to face whatever came next. The nightmare wasn't over, but neither was